Hello, everyone. It is just under a week until the DLC comes out, and we have so much more information and even gameplay footage of these two variant civilizations, so now's the time. Let's take a bit of a deep dive into both of them and figure out that based on your playstyle, which one should you be jumping into when the DLC releases on April the 8th. All of the creators have access as of tomorrow, April the 3rd, but let's jump in and see what we can kind of learn from a bunch of the different things I've seen and also this page that are dedicated to the civilizations. I had the Lancaster one pulled up first, which is of course the English variant Civ, but things are very, very different now thanks to the inclusion of the manors that are in this screenshot here. The units at a glance. You have the yeomen, which are replacing the English longbows. These seem to have a massive amount of range. And then the synchronized shot ability is kind of a targeted circle that kind of can rain down fire on your enemies. It seems to do a great deal of damage. So definitely looking forward to using that as an English main. I'm very pumped about this civilization for sure. And then on the other side here, we have the Lord of Lancaster. So you can have 4 of these on the field. You build them from the Abbey of the Kings, which is your feudal age landmark in this case, and they increase the health of nearby units. So each one stacks. So if you have all 4 kind of in a group of your army, that increases the health of all of your units in that army, meaning you definitely want to keep these guys alive. And it's going to be similar to Bannermen for Japanese. Your enemy's always going to be wanting to try and pick off your lords in this case. A little bit similar to Jeanne d'Arc, but not as much the leveling up whatsoever. A couple of cool cavalry units, the Hobilar, really sturdy kind of horsemen that seem to be quite a bit cheaper. They also, I think, are food and gold and not food and wood, which is what you're more typically seeing in terms of horsemen. And then the Demi-Lancer seems to be this very, very intense kind of later game unit that don't do a lot of damage but can just tank and tank on these front lines. It's going to be interesting to see if that's worthwhile, because normally you do want those tanky units to be dealing a lot of damage, but maybe this is just to be used as a bit of a front line so that your yeomen can then just be raining down hellfire from behind. Let's talk a little bit about how they go through the ages. So the House of Lancaster actually has an increased gather rate from sheep, which is huge. They also spawn with additional sheep below their town center, 4 additional sheep, and each time they build a new TC, they get 4 sheep under that town center. So a really big bonus to their food because, of course, the House of Lancaster does not have the same farm bonus that the English have. So as I said, increased rate from shepherds. Their 2 choices for the feudal age landmarks are the Lancaster Castle. Reminds me a little bit of kind of like the Barbican, which is going to allow you to potentially kind of protect one of your closer resources in case there's somebody who's going to be very aggressive against you. And it also really buffs up using your manors. And then secondly, of course, you have the Abbey of the Kings, which you mentioned before. That's how you kind of create those lords of the Lancaster. It does seem that if you do build this Lancaster Castle, it allows you to create manors around it, which are giving you passive resources, and then at any time you can do this quickly levy troops to their defense. You can see right here. And this levying, I think, is going to cost you a couple of resources, but if you have a ton of manors, then it's going to be very worthwhile to kind of get a bunch of free troops essentially out of those manors. So that's going to be really interesting to see. In Age 3, the King's College landmark is kind of the new one. It has a ton of really unique techs. Some of those include, I think it's increased melee defense for all armored units, or at least maybe it's defense in general for all armored units, which is going to be a massive buff, especially if you're running with some lords. It's going to make your units very, very tanky. And then also they have the ability to research a technology that gives them hand cannoneers in Castle Age. So they're early hand cannoneers. They cost less, only 90 food, 90 gold. And that means that you can mass potentially a huge amount of very, very tanky kind of melee units. I think that their man-at-arms are the Earl's Guard or something like that. And so these tanky man-at-arms, these tanky horsemen are going to be the front line for these really, really kind of early hand cannoneers. I think that's going to be very, very cool. And then Age 4, who knows? At this point, you have like the guys who throw the axes. These are the ones who are throwing the axes or the hammers, as you can see up at the front here. They, I believe... Oh no, I'm getting mixed up. That's the other civilization. Sorry. It's all new. But these guys throw knives kind of in a ranged thing in a similar way to the Donzos of the Malians. And then they run in with their hammers for more kind of immediate melee damage. And there, the Earl's Guards is what I was talking about with their man-at-arm. Really, really cool stuff. In terms of the play style, here's what I'm imagining. I think that the Lancasters are going to be very similar to the Malians, where you're going to be kind of doing a bit of like a manor boom as opposed to a cow boom. So it's one of those things where you're going to want to be creating a couple of units early to kind of give yourself a little bit of map pressure or the ability to kind of go out. Or you could maybe even be super greedy, go up with that the Lancaster castle in feudal age, and then just build manors only. And if you really require kind of defense at the last second, you can levy those troops at the last minute. So there's going to be a couple of different kind of more boomy, I think, options that are then going to allow you to kind of take control and go out onto the map. I think it's also really interesting that creating a new TC is going to give you that bit of extra sheep food as well. So really going to benefit from potentially going multiple town centers as well. And then obviously the range of the longbows. To me, this is seeming a little bit more like China and Malian in that way, where it's kind of more of a booming into late game kind of powerhouse, especially with kind of this Lancaster castle giving you the opportunity to protect and then levy these additional forces. So that is kind of what I'm expecting from the Lancasters. On the other side, we have to talk about the Knights Templar. Okay, so I've moved over to the Knights Templar page, and this is the French variant civilization, but they have so many new mechanics. I cannot wait to try all this really unique stuff out. I think the best place to start is that when the Knights Templar age up, they choose between 3 unique allies. And these allies are different civilizations in history, and by choosing them, they get access to either unique units or unique bonuses. And so that's what you're choosing between as you're aging up. But they also don't create landmark buildings in the same way a lot of the other civilizations in Age of Empires 4 do. What they do is they research a technology in the town center itself, meaning that while you're aging up, you're not producing villagers, which means that compared to the other civilizations, you're likely going to be very far behind in villager count. But there's a couple of different and unique kind of systems that this civilization uses in order to kind of recoup that economic deficit. So the first one is these pilgrims right here. So I've pulled up a game on this side. I'm going to show you guys. So when imagine that this is not English, this is the Knights Templar. Imagine that you have the town center, and every couple of minutes or every minute or so, what happens is that you have 2 pilgrims that spawn automatically from your town center. You cannot move these units. You cannot force them to go in different directions. They simply walk automatically in a straight line towards whatever sacred site it is that you have specifically designated. And there's a little button, I think, down here that allows you to switch between which sacred site you want these pilgrims moving towards. And if they make it all the way across the map towards this sacred site without dying, they do a little animation, and then you get 130 gold passively, essentially, into your economy. So that's one way that they're getting additional resources. The other is that the Knights Templar don't actually have to use lumber camps. They chop the wood automatically and kind of drop it off within themselves, and they also generate passive food while chopping wood. So you're not going to want to have a ton of villagers on food with this civilization. You're going to want to have a lot on wood in this case, and it's going to be giving you additional passive food. So that's kind of how that's going to work in terms of getting them a little bit better economy. But let's take a look more at the actual systems that they have in place. So again, a bunch of really unique units. I don't really know what the Templar Brother is, but I know Hospitaller Knights are these man-at-arms that have the ability to debuff enemy units while also healing themselves. So these are going to be quite useful and interesting to use. And then, they have these fortresses. Now, these fortress buildings, you can start building them in the feudal age. I think this is what it looks like. It's a little more kind of like wooden looking or rustic looking when it's in the lower ages. And they cost both gold and stone to build. Knights Templar, they only have their main town center as a landmark. So what this means is that if you lose that main town center, you lose the game. That's a landmark victory for the other player. However, if you build these fortresses, they count as additional landmarks. So you can have up to, I think it was maybe 4 to 6 fortresses over the course of the game, and they count as your landmarks. So the opponent has to destroy all of those fortresses and your TC in order to win in that case. So really looking forward to seeing how that works. However, the one thing I did read or did hear is that if that fortress is destroyed, you cannot repair it again. Not like normal landmarks. You can't repair it back up to full. It is gone forever. So a way I guess they're using to balance that out, I don't know. I just am so excited about using all these. So there's all these unique units, sacred sites, incredible gunpowder units. You can get these gigantic trebuchets up on top. My understanding is that the Knights Templar don't have any gunpowder units whatsoever. It says right here, actually, do not have access to gunpowder units. So there's no hand cannoneers, there's no Ribaldequins, there's no cannon emplacements for their towers or keeps. They have much improved trebuchets, though, that can sometimes fire double. And when I think about the playstyle of this, I'm imagining that you're definitely going to want to be putting on a decent amount of pressure early so that you can be escorting your pilgrims. Because if you're not escorting them, the enemy's going to have relatively easy pickings of taking them off. So you're definitely going to want to be kind of monitoring those with some of your early units. Also, going up to feudal age, I believe you're choosing between 3 unique units specifically. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to rush to castle, because then you don't have units, you don't have the economy necessarily to support the kind of things that you're doing. So I'm seeing this. I think also the fortresses give bonuses to stone walls. And so I'm seeing the Knights Templar as kind of a little bit like a Holy Roman Empire. Some focus on the sacred sites, focus on the relics, very defensive, potentially using their defensive as offensive. You get forward keep drops as the HRE, and then they build a town center behind for that emergency repairs, and it's very hard to deal with. So that's kind of the play style I'm imagining there, without really the ability to rush castle. It's more of like a feudal and slower build-up progression civilization. And that's the thing that's so amazing. Like, we're not getting copy-pasted mechanics from other civs. It seems like these two, the House of Lancaster and the Knights Templar, are going to be so different in terms of how they function and how they work. Let's talk team games for a second. How is this going to work in team games? I think Knights Templar is going to be a little bit hard-pressed to do well in team games, just because I'm imagining that they're going to be trying to escort their pilgrims, and that's very easy pickings early on. It's also a potential that if you're in a larger team game, put on a lot of early feudal pressure and try to take out just the town center of the Knights Templar player. They only have the one landmark. If you're able to destroy that, you've essentially taken them out of the game. I mean, obviously it doesn't take them out of the game because you have to destroy all their other landmarks, but or the rest of the team as well. So maybe that's not necessarily the case, but you certainly could jump on them pretty quickly based on the fact that they seem to have maybe a bit of a slower economy, thanks to the fact that they're having to take the time where they should be producing villagers to age up. It's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. For the House of Lancaster, I can see them being a really great kind of sit back and boom civ, similar to the Malians, where like you kind of sit back and boom a little bit. You have the ability to defend yourself if you need to, and then all of a sudden you kind of come online. There's a bit of a switch, and suddenly you have the economy that can just run through your opponents in such a big way. So I can imagine that they could potentially be quite aggressive with these, Yeoman longbows, but longbow rushes aren't particularly, useful in some of the larger team game maps anyways, because it takes too long for you to get to the other side. And so as a result, I really do think that, they are going to be a bit more of a sit back and boom situation to kind of get a huge amount of additional pressure later on in the game with just a wave of forces that are coming through, and forces that are quite tanky. I can imagine, based on the Lancaster's things that we've been reading, that maybe they end up kind of just being the front line for some of the more damage dealing units, because they have those tanky horsemen, those tanky lords. And so they're not doing the damage, but they're there forcing your opponent inside their town center, kind of afraid of the damage that's coming in, maybe from other players. Just some thoughts. Again, it's just under 7 days away, and I cannot wait. So thank you so much for watching this kind of breakdown of some of the civilizations, some of their mechanics. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully it's got the gears turning in your mind as to which one, based on your playstyle, kind of fits. Or maybe you want to be a complete maverick and say, it looks like this is maybe the best way to play this civilization, but I have an idea. And you could be the one to kind of invent something new and just completely go off the wall with a completely new strategy that people maybe haven't seen before. It's all open to us. It's all coming down the pipeline soon, and I can't wait. Thank you so much for watching. We got more Age of Empires 4 coming up. Can't wait for the DLC, and we will catch you in the next video. Bye for now.